Last year, Murat told me that I'm always bringing the bad news. I made it a rule. So I think everybody in the room is very eager to learn about what is going to happen in Europe with the post safeguards, what's happening with CBAM. Many of you know about that already, but let me, and that's what I'm trying to do today, is bringing kind of not a recipe, but actually explaining a bit more what do you have to expect from the perspective from a Turkish exporter and the perspective of a European importer. And to some of you, I've already mentioned the critical areas. So let me explain a little bit the new steel measures. As you know, nothing has been really concluded. Yes, there has been a draft. You know that we have in Europe 3 chambers, and that means all of them have to decide in what form those new steel measures will be implemented on the 1st of July. That's the most probable date. This also because the safeguards, they are ending on the 30th of June. And it is absolutely certain that Europe will not be left without any measure. That means any protection. So there will be a form of protection. And that means also, even if nothing has been finally concluded, that means with the European Union and also particularly with the free trade agreement countries in terms of the agreements with the shortage of quota and then also compensation methods. That means if they take something from the free trade agreement countries, then they need also to get something. This is a typical compensation method, and even if this has not been finalized, we can already assume that that it's coming. So bringing it actually from the import perspective, we will see, and you know, we are an importing company ourselves. We will see that there is a shortage, most likely by the 47%. It's most likely going to be a TRQ, the tariff rate quota system, as we have experienced until now with the safeguards. And that means also that most likely Turkey is going to have also on certain products a certain quota. For certain others, they will fall under the general quota of other countries. The problem is here that the increase of the out-of-quota tariff from 25% to 50%, and this has been also been approved by the European Parliament, so that's most likely going to be the fact, is that, you know, in the steel business, I don't know who of you has a margin of 50%. We don't have it, unfortunately, so it's not digestible. So that's one of the killing issues in this future trade relation, that if we are running out of quota when importing goods from Turkey, we have to pay 50% or most likely, again, as per the last safeguards, part thereof if we are importing on the 1st of each quarter. And we have an excess, that means on overage, that this is being then equally split. For the industry, it means, and you can see it already by the rising steel prices in Europe, that it has already today, in combination with CBAM, an effect on costs. So prices are rising, and that means prices are rising also for the European manufacturing industry. And as you know, or you might know, that Eurometal, defending the interests of the European processing and also manufacturing industry, because we are servicing the manufacturers. We see that. We see that, and also I see that every day when we are talking to our customers, that they are under price pressure. At the same time, and this is a concern that we have raised already a year ago, more than a year ago, is that we have those steel-based products. In the United States, they say steel derivatives. And those steel-based products, they are still coming into Europe almost untaxed, without any emission tax, without any safeguards. That means without any quota. And they are harming the competitiveness of our manufacturing industry. As a consequence, many companies, and I will come also later to that when we are talking about the current SSC business, many companies, they are shifting products which are not being competitive anymore to locations outside of Europe, so that they are basically following the trend, producing, manufacturing these components outside of Europe, and then shipping them into Europe again, because it's free of any duty and out of CBAM. So that's what we see from the European perspective. And I'm now coming to the Turkish perspective. So that means, as Turkish exporters, what will be your perspective bringing goods into the EU? So you have so far non-regulated exports. That means there is nobody who is saying you can only export so and so many tons of that product to be in line with the European import quotas, which is always bearing a risk. And that means that you will always see customers in the EU who say, well, yes, we would like to buy, but how can we be sure that we are not going to pay 50% duty? Because this 50% duty we cannot transfer to our final customers. And that's the critical issue. And I've talked to some of our partners here in this room that we need a recipe for that. And the recipe that we actually have already in place, it's nothing new, in countries like Korea and also Taiwan, export licenses. And for me, this is the only thing that Turkey needs to have in place to comply with the new system very fairly, or let's say definitely active as of 1st of July. That means you need to take care that you are not exporting more than the quota in the EU permits you to import. So, and it's a win-win situation, the recipe that basically is pretty well known, because if an export licensing is being directed by the ministry to each exporter with traditional export volumes, then you can also maximize the quota utilization, because your European customers can be sure that they don't need to pay import duty. And only if you're doing this, the confidence is growing. Another point is, and that's something that, of course, depending a little bit on the material we are talking about, but that's my personal perspective. I see that also with the restrictions under the import quotas, that we will move more and more from spot business to contract business. Lots of our customers in Europe are interested in regular supplies. They want to make contracts, they want to have a stability and qualities that they are importing. They want to be sure what they are getting. And also sometimes they need to do that because they have a final end user who is saying, no, we want to have stability. So we are registering, like in the automotive business, we are registering this supplier, the steel supplier, as our homologated qualified supplier. Ozan, you know it best from your business. So I'm coming to another delicate scheme and topic, and you remember I'm always spreading the bad news here in the room. So CBAM. CBAM is active, and there are a lot of discussions going on in the EU about the ETS system. To be softened, what to do with it, because it's cost intensive. as much as for the European steel producer, also for, of course, for the importers, and that also for the end users, because everything is being transferred to the final steel users. So the problem is that, and we are facing as importers the same issues, that we are not 100% sure about certain topics in the legislation. So there are some weak points. There's in the documentation, there are some weak points, and it has also a certain cost impact. So we have there's one paragraph about also the weighted emission averages, and we could clarify this in a webinar. This question was asked last week with the European Commission, that in fact, despite the fact that weighted averages, that means that you have different production routes, for example, blast furnace, electric arc furnace, and weighted average means that they are basically taking an average of the emissions that you are reporting, which is then also going to be the basis of the CBAM calculation. That means the emission charges that you need to pay to encounter as a basis for buying the CBAM certificates in 2027. And so we were informed by the Commission that indeed, if you have actual emissions that you are monitoring in the system, that you don't need to consider those weighted average, but you can also then use the actual emissions for each production route. So this subject seems to be cleared, even though, and this is again one of the weak points, it has not been documented. So it's not out actually in the legislative process. It has not been documented. Another weak point are the free allocations. You know that in the EU, it's based on the historic production activity. That means also on the emissions of the European mills. This is not actually, this system has not been transferred to CBAM. We see that the country default values, they have been increased. We don't know why. We don't know what's the system behind that. So it's also a miracle that some people, they do something. We don't know why. And of course, there's also a kind of a discriminatory factor by the routes, by the country benchmarks, where, for example, Turkey, and I also openly mentioned that, publicly mentioned that Turkey, with a share of, I think, about 75% electric arc furnace, is being benchmarked as a blast furnace-based country. And in parallel to this, pretty comparative, are the United States. United States have the country benchmark of electric arc furnace. So why Turkey is not and United States is? So for me, it's highly discriminatory. We have a mandatory 10% markup, which is increasing with every year, which means another cost factor. And we still have, I think we are close, but even the certifiers who will be openly mandated as of July of this year to verify the emissions of the installations, that they are even not certain about the methodology of the verification. There is an assumption, yes, but again, not 100% sure. So those are the uncertainties we have to live with. We can also, within our discussions with the certifiers, we can come close to that, but again, no certainty. So coming back to my topic, why is the extension of steel measures and also CBAM to steel-based products so important also for the Turkish steel industry? As you might know, actually making one step back, we started last year, we made an analysis also based on our initial discussions with the European Commission that we see an increasing trend of imported steel-based products into the EU. which has not been monitored. So they ask us for initial evidence. So we worked it up, and this is what you see, a summary summarizing the increases for the parts that have been imported for the various different industry. And as you can see, I think it's pretty visible that the automotive industry is with 40% of those imported steel derivatives, represents the highest share of imported steel-based products into the EU. Which means, of course, that this part is not being manufactured anymore in Europe. And this also brings me again to the point, why is this so important for the Turkish steel-making industry? Because this steel cannot be offered anymore to European manufacturers who are producing those parts in Europe. So that means it goes along with the trend that we have also seen, that with the increasing importation of steel derivatives, steel-based products, you see also a decreasing steel consumption in the EU, which is, of course, a logical consequence. And that will affect any steel supplier, also Turkey as a steel supplier to the European Union. On top of that, and that is basically what we have, honestly speaking, we don't understand why the European Commission has still not become more aggressive in implementing measures on those steel-based products, because we have actually not a market closure, but we have the United States who have implemented with the expansion of the Section 232, where they are putting 50% tariffs or 50% import duty on steel products, that they have also expanded those 50% to those products. That means for each and every steel-based product imported into the United States, users have to pay. And of course, it's like a virus which is going on. Canada nearby, actually on top of the United States, has now actually followed, is doing the same. And we are expecting further action, unfortunately, a further protectionism of what is coming. And what is the consequence? If exporters do not see the market any more viable in terms of competitiveness, attractiveness, they're switching to others. And there are not too many markets in the world. I mean, Europe is weak, yes, but we are still an interesting market. And of course, more and more end products, or let's say steel-based products, are shifting into the United States. Into the EU. So that means from the United States, this portion, and also Canada, is going into the EU. And we cannot wait further to stop that, because we see actually a fading manufacturing industry because of this already, and this will increase to a dramatic extent as we fear. So my last point, I don't want to take more of your time, but the last point is, of course, what's happening in the European steel service center and processing industry. And if you look at those figures, that 46 million tons are still being processed in the EU, the situation has not changed so dramatically. It's still, the capacity remains the same. I'm not talking about capacity utilization. That means what is effectively used with those capacities, but I'm talking about the capacities which are existing. So, and then of course you can certainly ask, so why are those capacities still existing if I'm making the point that we have more and more processed products which are coming in? It's a simple reason, and we see it also with our clientele. Many clients of ours saying that they're investing, or let's say they're inventing new products, more sophisticated products, interesting products, for example, for kitchenware or whatever. Those are products that are so far not being produced outside of Europe. And then they are shifting the simpler parts for manufacturing to outside of Europe, because they are not competitive anymore, but also as certain customers of us have emphasized, it will not take long, and then China, India, and others will adapt to this. They are also becoming more sophisticated, and then they are producing the more sophisticated stuff. And then, latest then, that means with a delay, we will also see that this has also an impact on the European processing capacity utilization. That means, obviously, as a consequence, a decrease in steel usage also in processing. The shares are also pretty much remain pretty much the same. So as you can see, we have the majority still in industry applications, still about 45% then in automotive, and the major players are in Western Europe and in Southern Europe. The blue column, that means Central Europe, Eastern Europe, is coming. It's increasing. That means lots of investors in steel services. They see that there's a growing market because manufacturing within Europe is also shifting to Central Eastern Europe because it's cheaper. It's not as cost intensive as Western Europe. So that means the industry is slightly shifting. So you will see also in the coming years an increasing processing activity in Central Europe from. That's it. That's the tendency. And we still have, as you can see, also the latest developments, market news that you may have heard last year. We still have also, again, the same ratio in terms of independent steel service centers versus to the mill integrated ones. So what's happening in this respect? Of course, we have a consolidation also there. We see that smaller players in steel processing are fading away, and bigger players are taking that share. That is certainly also due to the fact that bigger players trying to complete their production and also their product groups. So that means they are taking up product groups that they have not in their portfolio so far. And that means that they are using also that means, for example, in terms of gauges, starting with lower gauges or higher gauges, that means they are completing their portfolio in this respect. So we see a lot of movements in this respect, also from outside. If you see the latest acquisition by Worthington Steel in the United States, taking over the Klöckner facilities in Europe and the United States. As I said, shifting also to Central Europe and investing in new lines. We have new slitting lines. Traditional slitting lines came to a minimum thickness of 0.35 millimeters. So there are now new slitting lines that have been implemented starting with 0.2 millimeter and below, which are then also suitable for high frequency electrical steels that means a typical NO20 grade or something like that, which needs also, let's say, a modification in the slitting process, and of course starting with lower thicknesses. So that's also in terms of technical developments of the products, where also new investments are being done to service those sectors. And finally, despite the fact that, and I remember just one instruction last year of Steel Orbis, don't talk about green steel. But still, I mean, the decarbonization is perhaps, it's slower in terms of pace, but it's still ongoing. I mean, we need the decarbonization, and many companies also in steel processing have not only started, but they're continuing with decarbonization efforts in terms of logistics. Of course, using also the EPDs of low carbon steel products for certain end users, which still remains extremely important, but that they are also trying to complete in the value chain within their process, using also, of course, electricity from renewable energies and reorganizing the logistic so that the carbon footprint is improving. This is continuing. And so we can see that this is today part of the steel processing business to become a more, let's say, environmentally friendly. This is it from my side. I think I was asked that I can be open for questions. If you have any questions, Murat Bey will take care of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alex. Soru var mı? Julius için.
Any questions? Let me take microphone.
Hello, my name is Tolga. Center and also Galva machinery, which is producing coil processing machinery. I am on both sides of CBAM, which means I'm an exporter from Turkey. Plus, we have a company in Romania, which we are importing. As you mentioned, there are a lot of gray areas, undocumented areas, which is very contradictory to me because Europe is a very serious institution, let's say, and as an importer, I have all the rights to know my cost when I'm importing. And so we have some assumptions, we know, we make some assumptions and we are trying to do our business there, but do you have any concerns in the future? I am sure there's, thousands of European importers are making similar assumptions and somebody will lose money because his assumption was wrong, because there is a lot of gray areas, a lot of undocumented areas, and appeal to this, because since this wasn't done in the best, not professional, excuse the language, but in the right way with a lot of gray areas, and people lose money, and they will say this is against my right of knowing the cost of import or human rights or something like that. So is there any concern on the European side that this system might be delayed or go into legal problems in the future?
With regards to the legal problems, I leave the floor later on to Lars from Katwijk, who will answer actually the legal issues. I think you are more experienced in that field than I'm. Let me just answer your question more from a practical perspective, as we are doing it with our company. We are trying to come as close as possible within the CBAM calculation. And of course, with the ETS hedging, that means that the EUA, which is a volatile factor in the calculation, but we are with the latest publishing of the European Commission, we are trying to come as close as possible to the actual costs. For this, of course, you need to have reliable partners on the steel producing side. That means, honestly speaking, we are only working with companies, with steel-making companies, who are, with evidence, very close to their final emission scopes. And, you can actually come closer to that by saying, okay, where is the vast majority of emissions coming from? It's the steel-making process. It's not the re-rolling. Once, let's say, the slabs are being produced, you can basically, let's say the emissions that are then following in the hot rolling, cold rolling, and coating processes are basically minor. So the key factor is what are the emissions of the steel making facility. And you need to come as close as possible with your partners. And perhaps allow me also the remark when I was also saying that we are moving a little more from spot business to contract business. I think that within the supply chain, you will have a strengthening of relationships between the different stakeholders of the supply chain, a better communication. And this is necessary. So my recommendation is remain close to your suppliers. Try to get really to get them on the table at the table to have their emissions, and then try to make the calculation as close as possible. I don't believe that that lots will change. It might be that that's my hope, personal hope, that we will perhaps some softening on the ETS system. But you know, from the current perspective, I could only tell you remain with what you have and get close to the calculation factors. That's it. I think to fight against the Commission, start cases or whatsoever, you can do that. I don't see short-term, let's say, positive results then in your favor, honestly speaking. So I would always remain practical.
Thank you. Any other questions? Anything?
Hello again, welcome. Alexander, always it's nice to see you here. It was very obvious in your presentation to see that there is decrease or increase in imports of final products. Yeah, EU is blocking the steel imports, but it's the final products are increasing. So you didn't mention that this made in EU. Let's see, say process. Do you think it will affect this import, block the flow of imports to EU in this wise?
Again, just to mention that all what you're asking now, it's not Eurometal, it's my perspective as Macrometal.
Okay.
Personally, no, I don't see that. Because first of all, buying Europe, that's basically more for the civil sector. That means public procurement. And the private sector is completely exposed to those imports. I think nothing will change unless you're creating a level playing field and taxing those imports as well. And that's, honestly speaking, that's our ambition. That's what we are fighting for. I mean, Eurometal is actively engaged now in also with a new initiative that we are trying to cover this sector without having the same taxation on steel-based products and also CBAM on steel-based products, so that we have a level playing field with the steel products, with imported steel. We will not see a fair game, and we will see an unchanged trend.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, so I think that's all.
Very good. Thank you very much. All right, next.